All right, let's talk about data. Every single day, we're creating this unbelievable amount of it. Photos, messages, bank transactions, you name it. But how do we keep all of that information from just becoming a giant chaotic mess? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down here. The two big competing ideas for how we organize our digital world. So let's start with a question to frame this whole thing. I mean, think about it for a second. Your bank account has to be perfectly accurate, right? Down to the last cent. But then you have your social media feed, which is just this wild, constantly changing river of photos, text, videos, all mixed together. The way we manage these two very different things, well, that's the whole story. So we're faced with this absolute deluge of data. Where in the world do we even begin to bring some order to the chaos? Well, the very first step, the foundational tool for all of this, is something we call a database. And at its heart, a database is really that simple. It's a system for organizing information. The whole point isn't just to store a bunch of stuff, it's to store it in a way that lets us find exactly what we need, quickly and efficiently whenever we need it. And the concept doesn't have to be high-tech. Just think about an old-school phone book. It's a perfect example. It's a collection of data, names, addresses, phone numbers, all organized alphabetically so you can find someone fast. That's it. That's a database. Okay, and this brings us to the two main characters in our story today. On one side, you have SQL. We're going to call SQL the librarian. Super meticulous, loves order, and demands structure. And on the other side, we have NoSQL, the archivist, who is all about embracing flexibility and handling any kind of variety you can throw at it. So let's start with our librarian, SQL. This way of thinking about data has been the gold standard for decades, and it's built on a world that's all about tables and very, very strict rules. And this is the most important thing you need to know. In the SQL universe, everything must live in a table. Seriously. Think of a spreadsheet, right? It's got neat rows, neat columns, and every piece of information fits perfectly into a little cell. That is the fundamental law of SQL. And you can see that structure perfectly right here. Look how clean and organized this is. Every employee has a name, an ID, a department. Every single row follows the exact same format. There are no surprises, no exceptions. This rigid structure is actually SQL's greatest strength. Now, this leads to a really key concept called schema on write. So imagine you're building a library from scratch. You have to design and build all the shelves, that's the structure, the blueprint, the schema, before you're allowed to put a single book on them. You decide up front, this shelf is for fiction, that shelf is for history, but here's the kicker. What happens if, down the road, you decide you want to add a section for, say, magazines? Well, you have to basically shut everything down, bring in the construction crew, and rebuild the shelves. This is exactly why some software updates are such a pain. Changing that initial blueprint is a huge, complicated job. That's the world of SQL. So you might be thinking, wow, that sounds incredibly rigid. And it is, but the payoff for all that strictness is huge. SQL databases are unbelievably reliable and consistent. They're perfect for things like financial data where you absolutely cannot afford a single mistake. And because it's all so perfectly structured, you can ask really complex questions that connect data from different tables. Like, show me every employee in the finance department who was hired last year. Okay, so if SQL is our neat and tidy librarian, who's our other character? Well, meet the archivist, NoSQL. It was designed specifically to handle the messy, unpredictable, and just massive amounts of data that really define the modern internet. You see, NoSQL was born because the internet just exploded with what we now call big data. Think about it. Social media posts, user profiles with all sorts of different info, photos, videos. This stuff just does not fit into neat little rows and columns. But it's not just about variety. It's also about scale. How does a company like Netflix handle millions of people all hitting play at the exact same moment? They need a system that can grow massively and incredibly fast. That's the problem NoSQL was built to solve. And here's the cool part. Unlike SQL's one-size-fits-all approach, the table, the NoSQL archivist has a whole toolkit of different options. It's not just one thing. You might use a document database to store a whole user profile, bio, pictures, friends list, all in one chunk. Or you could use a graph database to map out that incredibly complex web of friendships on a social network. The name of the game is flexibility.
The philosophy here is the complete opposite of SQL. It's called schema on read. The archivist basically says, hey, just bring me your boxes of information. I don't care what's inside, we'll find a place for them. It's only when you decide to open a box to read what's in it that you actually figure out what you've got. This allows for just incredible speed and agility. You can change and evolve your application on the fly without needing a massive, painful restructuring project.
Okay, so we've got the rigid, rule-loving librarian and the flexible, anything-goes archivist. This, of course, leads us to the big question, so which one's better? Well, this table really lays it all out pretty clearly. Where SQL is strict and structured, NoSQL is flexible. Where SQL is king for asking complex questions, it can be pretty tough to change. NoSQL, on the other hand, is built from the ground up for agility, speed, and handling massive, massive scale. They're just fundamentally different tools designed for different jobs. And that's really the main takeaway here. This is not a battle where one has to win and the other has to lose. The question is never which database is the best. The real question, the one you should always ask, is which database is the best for the problem I am trying to solve right now? So let's look at a few real-world examples to make it stick. If you're building a banking app, you hire the SQL librarian, no question. You need that absolute ironclad consistency. But if you're building the next big social network, you're going to need the NoSQL archivist to handle all that messy user-generated content and to map out billions of relationships. It's all about matching the right tool to the job at hand. And so we'll end on this thought. We have these two incredibly powerful but very different ways of organizing information. As our digital world gets even more complex and more connected, maybe the future isn't about choosing one over the other. Maybe it's about figuring out how the rigid, reliable librarian and the fast, flexible archivist can learn to work together, combining their strengths to build the amazing systems of tomorrow.